What effect did that first Nebula Award have on your career?
Absolutely none. I went to a convention 2 weeks after I won it, expecting at least minor kinds of recognition, and nobody seemed to be aware that I had won it. It made no difference in the sale of my next book, even though Nebula winner gets to be put on the cover. And I would suspect that a lot of people don't even remember it. If you can win a Nebula for a novel, or a Hugo for a novel, that's even better. It can have a significant impact on sales. But the short fiction awards, at least in my case, had absolutely none.
Well, what was it about that story, do you think, that made it a winner?
I don't know. I was kind of surprised myself. I've written stories with more exotic settings. I've written stories with more SF tropisms in them, aliens and space travel and genetic mutation. And I've written stories that seem to me to reach stylistically to more ambitious heights. I guess I would have to say that the only thing about that story that made it memorable was that the character had a genuineness that perhaps my other fiction hasn't. And I find that if it is true, I find that kind of encouraging to think that there's still a place in science fiction for the exploration of characters who are in no way remarkable, which of course was the whole point. Sally Gourley is an unremarkable waitress. History has passed her by. And I think it's very encouraging that science fiction still has a place in a small way for the ordinary person.
One of the great spin-offs of the Nebulas, besides the gratification felt by the winners, is that each year the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America who hand out the awards also compile an anthology of the winners with an editor's choice of runners-up. Nancy Kress's story, Out of All Them Bright Stars, can be found in Nebula Awards 21. The current editor of the Nebula anthology is James Morrow. Jim is also a Nebula winner. His short story, Bible Stories for Adults, number 17, The Deluge, picked up the prize for 1988. But he's seen the flip side of that coin as well. His novel, Only Begotten Daughter, lost out to Ursula K. Le Guin's Tahanu, the Last Book of Earthsea, a couple of years ago. But at least he was nominated.
The Nebula came at a very crucial point in my own career because I had recently lost it in the case of This Is the Way the World Ends versus Speaker for the Dead. So getting the Nebula was a crucial boost for me psychologically. And I suppose when it goes to a writer who's really well established already, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But in my case, it put me on the map, and I was invited to be like one of the earliest of the Pulp House collection contributors, and I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't won the Nebula.
How big a role do you think politics plays in the Nebula selection process?
That's a good question. It's darn political as far as I can tell. I don't think there's any solution to that problem. The Academy Awards are political. You know, I suspect if we knew the full truth that the Nobel Prize is political and the Pulitzer is probably political. But the whole problem with the nebulas, it seems to me, is the availability of the stories and novels. Because the people who take an interest in the kind of serious literary science fiction that the Nebula presumably rewards have enough trouble keeping up with what's in Asimov's. And so the assumption emerges that, well, that's where we're probably going to find the Nebula winners, and if not there, then F and SF. But beyond that, you know, you might get an amazing story on the ballot, but it's not likely to win. The numbers are against it. You just don't have that many people reading amazing, and you know, forget about some story that might be in the mainstream, but still worthy of the science fiction label.
The Nobel Prize and the Pulitzer. Boy, he really had to rub my nose in it, didn't he? Politics was behind the one and only instance of a Nebula Award being declined. Lisa Tuttle turned down the short story Nebula when the Bone Flute topped the ballot for 1981. Imagine, she won and didn't want the award. So that award is just gathering dust when it could be given to someone else deserving of recognition. You know, whoever. Why did you decline the Nebula Award for the Bone Flute? And has your protest had any effect?
My protest has had no effect whatsoever, as far as I can tell. The reason I declined it was I objected to the way campaigning was done, and it didn't seem to me fair. I thought either all the voting membership should have copies of all the stories sent to them by SFWA, or no one should be allowed to get their editor or their publisher to mail out, circulate the membership, so that everyone basically had the same shot at the award, and it wasn't a matter of if you could get a hold of the particular magazine or book it was in. So because I sat down and wrote a letter objecting in the strongest possible terms to this, I thought, well, the only way I can really object, I can't just write this sort of mamby-pamby letter. I have to actually write to them and say, I object to this so much, I'm withdrawing my story from consideration. So I did this, and I mailed the letter off, and within a week of having mailed it, before the letter could even have arrived in wherever it was, Seattle or wherever I had to send it to, I was living in Devon at the time, I got a phone call from someone who I didn't know, who said, "You've won the Nebula Award, congratulations." And I said, who is this really? Because I thought it must be someone who knew I'd written this letter. Oh, no, and we've just counted the votes, and we wanted to tell you. This was like, I don't know, a month or 6 weeks or 2 months before the actual banquet, so that I could decide to be there. Well, I'd also always thought that the rules were that nobody knew who won until it was announced. This apparently was not the case. Anyway, I said, I'm sorry I can't win it because I've just withdrawn my story from consideration. And I then felt that I really must, although this was not a major issue to me then, and it certainly is an even less major issue to me now, I felt that having put, it's like you give your word, and then you don't just say, oh, well, I've won, that's different. I'll have it after all. So I said, since I've withdrawn it, regardless of the fact that it was too late to withdraw it, I'm afraid I'll just have to decline the award.
Yeah, but doesn't the fact that you won sort of undercut your argument?
Oh, no, it isn't the point of whether wasn't saying that it's too effective. That people who can send their story out have a better chance, although I think they have a better chance of being read. And I don't know why I won. I didn't even think it was, that story, here's a moral lesson for you, that story was rejected by at least 2 editors before I sold it. So what it was doing winning a Best of the Year, it seems to me rather peculiar.
Unfortunately, because Lisa declined, the Bone Flute isn't in the Nebula anthology. So the only place to find it is in Lisa's 1987 collection, A Spaceship Built of Stone. It's a great book, well worth tracking down. The first Nebula Awards were given out in 1966, and the choices for Best Novel are always interesting. As Chris mentioned off the top, sometimes the award goes for, I can't believe he pulled that off. A perfect example is the winner for 1973, Rendezvous with Rama. Astronauts enter a lifeless alien spaceship, poke around, and leave. Arthur C. Clarke weaves that simple plot into a spellbinding read. And often, the Nebula winner foreshadows a new trend in SF. Ursula Le Guin's 1969 winner, The Left Hand of Darkness, marked the beginning of a lot of feminist science fiction. Joe Haldeman's The Forever War was one of the first of many stories to deal with Vietnam. And William Gibson's 1984 winner, Neuromancer, galvanized the whole cyberpunk movement. As well as the Nebula, Neuromancer scooped the Hugo and the Philip K. Dick Award. That's the triple crown of science fiction. Were you surprised by the success of Neuromancer?
Well, I was surprised by the triple award win, which was just a very freaky and anomalous thing. And I did it, I thought I had a chance at winning the Philip K. Dick Award, which at that time was sort of aimed at weird SF and paperback original. Anyway, I didn't think I had much hope of the Nebula, but I was positive that it wasn't going to win the Hugo. And in fact, if the World SF Convention had been held in the United States, I don't think I would have won the Hugo. The Brits and the Australians have a very different taste, and since you have to be an attending member of the convention to vote for the Hugo, it kept a lot of American voters out of the pool.